will take it down. And panelists, if you will just tell me, each other, everybody here, what did you notice? Take your time.
I noticed 4 figures. I noticed some kind of poultry in the center of the table, but I'm going to leave it to Brian to determine what kind of poultry it is, since he raises so many domesticated animals.
Wow. Not from the Middle Ages.
Neither is this painting, so
Right, it's true.
help, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
In addition to the poultry, I noticed some fruit.
Yeah.
And 2 loaves of bread. Don't quote me on that, but I remember seeing 2 loaves of bread.
Just struck by the movement in the painting. So the figure in the center, his hand was moving outward. The figure to our right, visually, his hand was moving sort of upward and away. The figure closest to us in the image was, his hand was on the back of his seat and kind of leaning in forward. So I noticed that right away, the movement, especially the hands of at least the 3. I don't know that I caught the other, the 4th figure.
I think the one in the back corner, he was holding like a glass pitcher, I believe, of water, and it looked like he was bringing it to the table. So there's a little movement there as well.
Yeah.
A staggering sense of being drawn from without to within by the hands of the one fellow to the central figure's left, which are disappearing into a depth and then also reaching out to you and setting your eye into motion directly into the visage of the central figure. It's an exceedingly powerful graphic.
I mean, that figure on the right side is almost even a bridge, right? He has his arms outstretched.
Yes.
I mean, we could almost say in cruciform fashion, but I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself here, right? But his arms are outstretched, and I think that becomes almost like a road into the painting here.
Yep. He's into the depths and dark. You can barely see the one hand, and then the other hand is out, defined, and beckoning.
Yeah.
And the other thing I noticed, I think I noticed this, I'm ready to be corrected, is that there is no source of light apart from the visage of the central figure.
Yeah, no source of light depicted, you know, like
Right,
no candle
that's what I
or
mean, in the
anything like
painting.
that. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and the figure in the center has the most striking color, wearing the most striking color compared to the others, and it compares to everything else in the painting. Certainly, you would assume the artist designed it that way to create a contrast between that image and the rest, for sure. Deep red, crimson. Yeah.
Which is interesting because I may not be remembering this correctly. I know we'll see it again, but I don't recall anything to drink other than the water, which is being brought to the table. So the crimson red may have more significance in the sense that I don't believe there was like a glass of wine or a decanter or anything on the table.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned the color of the clothing, and the figure on the right side with his arms outstretched was wearing a little brown mantle on his shoulders, with a scallop shell. And so the painter is telling us that he is a pilgrim. Right. So that's the little mantle of the pilgrim with the shell of the Camino, Santiago on there. But they're definitely, like you said, I mean, it's dull, right? When you have the brown color. The figure closest to us in the front and the kind of foreground on the left, right, who's, jumping out of his chair. I can't remember the color of his clothing very well, but I remember that it was torn.
I believe it's a very cool green.
That does sound correct.
I was just, I mean, I honestly, I was so struck by the contrast of light and dark, and drawn immediately to the image. I wasn't really paying attention in a way. I was just sort of it sounds sort of corny, but just receiving, and I just couldn't take my eyes off of the figure in the middle, and then noticing the contrasting light and dark. Clearly, both of you were much more attentive to detail, and I'll work on that the next time it's up. I'll be ready. We'll see.
Well, you were doing what the other three figures were doing, though, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what you're supposed to do when you look at this painting, right? It has a focal point. And the other three figures are creating that focal point because they're all doing what you were doing. They're looking at that central figure.
Right. Right.
Which is, you notice the crimson red, but if you have the brown and the green, right, those are more earth tones.
Right.
So there's a contrast even with that figure's different. Brighter is something that we've said already, but even with the vibrancy of the clothing, that creates a contrast that draws your attention there.
Right. And Jared, you could obviously speak more to this based on the even the intro that Larissa gave you, but it's fascinating to me the way that a painter can train your eye wherever he or she wants it to go. Not by drawing an arrow or a sign that says, look here, but through the use of light and dark, through the use of distance, through the use of balance and color, and you don't even realize it's happening. And that's sort of the fascinating thing about, I would say, good art. And bad art, people have to tell you what the art is, they have to say, this is the thing, look at this, and here's the point I'm trying to make. Good art, it does, the artist is able to create that encounter without telling you about it. I mean, I guess every good piece of art, whether depicted in painting or sculpture or in music or writing, it does the showing, not the telling, right? That was always the mantra of my English professors at university, especially in creative, right? You need to show, not tell. And good art shows without having to tell,
Something else that I noticed is that the legs of the poultry, right? You see the bone sticking out, and they're pointing the same direction as the arms of this central figure. I'm sure we all know who this central figure is. But anyways, so the arms of Jesus are reaching out across the table, right? They're going across the loaf of bread, which are kind of, I think, don't remember exactly, but I would almost want to even say contained within his arms, like he's reaching over the bread. And I noticed just a parallel between his arms and the legs of this bird. And I'm wondering if there is some meaning here for us between the outstretched arms, the bread, and the bird. The bread is kind of obvious, I believe. But I'm wondering if there's an interplay here with the meat that's at the center of the table. I believe it's pretty central to the table itself, the bird, right? So I think that gives it prominence and the setting of the table and the action that's happening there.
Jared, do you agree with me and Brian? You, the viewer, I, the viewer, you, the viewer, we, the viewers, are at the table. We can't be anywhere else in the room, see what we see and be drawn as we're drawn unless we're the fourth at the table.
You want some evidence for that I noticed?
Please.
So if you're coming up and you're taking your place at that table as the fifth, right, at the table.
Fourth at the table, one's a server, I think.
True. I mean, but he comes up at this climactic moment though. So he's caught up in the scene, right? So you're right. He's not a guest at the table. So in that sense, yeah, you would be the fourth. That would be a guest. But I think that this happens though to catch his attention, you know, because he's not one of the two pilgrims, right? Because we have the evidence, at least from the one, that there's a pilgrim here. So the one's not a traveler, but he's there. He's caught up in it.
Yeah.
Like we're supposed to be, right? So are we being invited to the table? Are we walking into this inn and saying, hey, what's happening here? But the thing that caught my attention in terms of having a seat at the table is that something is happening that would require our response. And that is the fruit. So now I mentioned that there's no wine on the table that I noticed, but there are grapes. Okay. Bread, not wine, but bread and grapes, right? And there's other fruit that is arranged with the grapes, but they're about to fall off the table. You can actually see the shadow underneath the edge of the fruit dish. And it looks like this is part of the effect, right, of drawing us into it, right? Because not only do you have the guy with his chair, you know, about to burst out of his seat, but there's something actually, it looks like it's going to fall towards you, right? So the seated figure looked like he's going this way, but the fruit looked like they're going to come this way, right? And that's part of that whole illusion of movement and the dynamism of the painting. But it looks like you should step up and you should catch that.
Yeah. And there's the rest of the painting is filled except for that corner, which is curiously empty. It needs to be filled, you know. I think you're right, Dr. Cortright. It's not as though you're leaning in over the table to look over the people who might be sitting there, right? If that were the case, there'd be another figure closest to us, half turned inward, and you would sort of be looking over kind of, hey, what's going on? But there's no one there. There's no figure painted there. So that's for you. That's for the viewer. Absolutely. And the fascinating thing in a way is that, I mean, at least to me, if I'm recalling the painting is balanced, but it still there's still a sense of absence, as if some other part of the space in the painting should be filled, but it's not, right? Because of the desire on the part of the artist to place us there.
It seems to me you, the viewer, can have the perspective you have and cannot escape if and only if you're on a level with the other figure. And you are approaching or at
Right.
the table. By
Yeah,
approaching, I mean sliding forward, not walking toward.
Right.
Chairman.
It's a dramatic moment that I think the viewer's invited to participate in.
Which is profoundly spiritual in nature, right? That you're not just looking at what you recognize perhaps as a biblical scene and say, oh yeah, I know that from the Bible, and then move on with your life. It's a moment of contemplation. The art is not the story, and the story, yes, if you're familiar with it, but not the story per se, but that you're looking in and invited in to that moment of revelation, to that moment of profound encounter. Not, this is a historical photograph that could easily be, captured on your iPhone for documentation purposes, right? This is, it's an opportunity for prayer, which is pretty amazing if you think about it, that an artist is able to do that.
I think this is a painting you can't see unless you are incorporated in it. It seems to me that that's the character of spiritual truth.
Mm.
You can't see a spiritual truth, as it were, from a distance. You must be incorporated in it in some respect, in some fashion. Here, the incorporation is by sight, right? And by the painting's physics, which will not allow denial. You can't look at that painting, can't adjust your perspective. There's only one allowed.
Yeah, I think it's making a statement in that sense. I certainly don't disagree that it's contemplative, but there's no clouds in this picture. It's not ethereal, right? I mean, it's even gritty.
There's no cherubim peeping over the chair.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the kinds of details that are presented prominently. Like I said, even like a torn jacket, the food, which, it's not, like you said, it's not like it's a photograph of what happened there, but there is a photographic kind of realism to things. Right. That the figures are not whitewashed figures. They look like people that you could actually meet.
Right.
People maybe in the pews, right? So you think of, like, a lot of Renaissance art, or, it's these figures who are perfect, unapproachable. Their clothing is, gilt,
Right.
But this is not the case here. And I think it's part of the message of the painting itself.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Yeah. And I think the idea that, but perhaps the idea that I was trying to communicate earlier, I think that's precisely it. I'm sure this painting is in a museum somewhere.
I believe.
But it, in one sense, it's out of place as a painting, because what it can lead a person, not necessarily, well, hopefully the beauty itself is striking enough that it gives someone walking by pause, even if they don't even know who's in the painting, even if they don't even know that the scene in the painting that's depicted, and even if they did know but weren't terribly interested, hopefully the beauty itself would pause. I mean, that's the whole purpose of beauty, is to capture the senses to truth and wonder, but it's fascinating that it's almost out of place in a museum, because it has a contemplative movement to it. It has a contemplative, different from, let's say, say a landscape or something impressionistic. It can be contemplative in another way, but I think I'm coming back to the same point of being drawn in, and not just a depiction of the scene as it perhaps happened, but as if you are there in the present moment when it's happening. Yeah.
Which would be liturgical, right? That's what the liturgy does, to draw you into the event, not just to evoke something past, but to draw you into something present. And yeah, it is a shame that it's in a museum because it was not painted for a museum, right? It's painted for a church
Right.
to assist in the liturgical action.
Right. I wonder how many painters are out there painting paintings to help assist in liturgical action. Do people even paint paintings anymore like that?
There's
I
a
hope.
comeback. Yeah. Okay, something almost was shared there, it looks like.
Sorry, 1 second. Almost. Should share this. There we go. Sorry, I should have said this time I'll leave it up so
Oh,
you
okay. Yeah.
can
Great.
talk and look at the same time. Sorry, I should have told.
Okay, so everyone has their own loaf of bread, right? So I was wrong about the 2. There's 3 at the table.
Hmm.
I was also wrong about another decanter. So there is water. It doesn't look like, is it being brought by the waiter? Maybe it isn't actually. And there is another decanter there.
It's hard to exactly tell what if this is I mean, do we assume it's a waiter coming to the table and but it's fascinating because if I see the picture correctly, it looks like he has his hands kind of on his pants,
Yeah.
like on his belt, kind of like, wait a second,
Yeah.
what's going on here? You know, kind of,
Yeah.
His left hand is at his waistband.
yeah, kind of sticking in his waistband.
Yeah.
Sort of like, what
Yeah.
what are you saying? What, you know? And the other two are, it's almost as though those two kind of get it, and the other one is encountering for the first time almost. Yeah.
That does seem to be right. Something that struck me the first time and is that I wondering if there's something to the figure on the right, who's stretching his arms out. If is it a priestly gesture or meant to evoke that, right? You know, that in a way it's almost like Jesus, the figure in the red. I believe that's clear, right? But you know, is blessing the bread, right? You can see one hand is hovering over the loaf. In this figure, as I said before, is a kind of bridge, right, from Jesus out towards us, you know. But you know, if you look at some particular forms of the mass, I think like the serum use, maybe the Dominican rite, you know, where the priest actually has his arms stretched out like that, you know. And so to me, it somewhat evokes the gesture of the priest at the altar. We could maybe take the skepticism or, you know, just kind of the inquisitiveness of that standing figure a little bit farther. I mean, he's the only one who has the you know, the Jewish cap on. And I don't know if there's meant to be a contrast between those at the table, seated at the table, and those who kind of stand apart and kind of look in from the outside. It's possible meaning there.
Jared, do you take the shadow to be the standing figure? Thinking back to my original, there are 2 sources of light in this painting. I was wrong. But I think the shadow is a shadow of the standing figure, whoever we take him to be.
Just kind of wondering though, you know, it seems like there's a shadow of a head and then you might think a shoulder, but then I'm just kind of wondering what's sticking up. Is that like a finger or something sticking up there though?
I'm not sure. He's got some kind of thing thrown over his shoulders. I'm thinking it's not sure.
But I also noticed, just turning back to the figure with his hands outstretched both ways, he has something like some kind of cloth sort of wrapped at the waist, which
Right.
makes me think of a cincture. It makes me think there's a. It's not it doesn't look like a napkin, that he's just using as to protect his clothing. It's clearly tied in a kind of knotted way. Also really now struck by the chair that this closest figure in the green is sitting in. I don't know. I don't know enough about furniture of that time period to know if that was a common form of furniture, but it's obviously very elaborate and intricate. I'm in the process of just building about as simple a table as you can, as a human being can build. I mean, it's a rectangle with 4 rectangles holding it up. It's as simple as can be, but the chair is extremely ornate. And when I first look at it, I think boat and I think ribs. And you don't paint the chair in a particular way without trying to communicate something,
So the painting is obviously a moment of recognition, right? So the 2 other seated figures, at this moment, they have an aha moment, right? So the figure of Jesus is meant to be both like and unlike, right? Because there is a kind of discovery. And that also is an invitation, right? We're talking about the participatory nature, the liturgical nature of the painting. If you're being asked to come up to the table, I think, Jesus is blessing the bread with one hand, the other hand is outstretched as a blessing, not to the loaf, but to those around the table, and reaches out towards the viewer a bit more. So I think it increases this sense of you should be doing what the other figures are doing here, right? That there's an epiphany that you need to experience, right? To come to see who this really is through similar actions. I don't know when we're having a reveal moment, Robert, about artist and painting, but I think at this point, I'm sure we could have a lot of guesses at this point. What's happening in this painting, right?
The 2 flanking figures, the one in green lifting himself from his chair or about to, and the other flinging his hands out. Those are in some sense opposed gestures. By opposed, I don't mean conflicting, but just distinct.
Yeah.
Discrete gestures. And I'm trying to figure out what they portend.
It could be surprise, right? If you get up from your chair, right? Or both different forms of surprise, I suppose. The arms could be an embrace.
That's right. One is, I mean, I want to say one is erstaunt. One of them is astounded. He's getting up from his chair. He's going to look more closely. But the other is triumphant. I think. I think it was Brian who said he's got his hands outstretched to embrace the scene. He's taking it.
But it's interesting that neither of them are looking at Jesus, right? Neither of the man standing seems to be looking right at Jesus, at his face, but the figure in green is almost looking down. It seems to me like he's looking down almost toward the table, and then the other figure with the arms outstretched is also, I think his eyes are looking downward almost. And I'm trying to think of the particular biblical wording, because it talks about revelation. It talks about, if I recall, eyes being opened.
He was made known to them,
Right.
is the wording, right? Yeah.
Right.
In the breaking of the bread.
Right.
So I think you're right. I think that's huge for interpreting the painting, is that they're looking downward towards towards the bread, right?
Yeah. Which is fascinating. The Eucharistic nature of the painting. You have Jesus there, clear as day, who they don't see at all during the entire conversation, nor do they see until they sit down. And it's only in the Eucharistic moment that they recognize that it's him. And in the painting, they're not even looking at him. They're looking at that which has just been made present by his blessing.
And then he vanishes from their midst.
That's right. I know it's cliche to say Caravaggio is so good, but he's so good. He's just so good, you know, and you're supposed to like other people and obscure painters that no one ever heard of, but maybe Jared, and then you can sound like you know something about, but he's just so good. Everything, you know, just everything that, I shouldn't say everything, but of all of the biblical and scriptural and I mean, every painting is just gold, you know. So moving, so striking. Yeah.
Well, if you're not supposed to like him, then why are his paintings so darn expensive?
It's well.
I think it's because people like him. Yeah.
No, right. Yeah.
So I actually have one second artifact that I'm going to present, and I'm actually going to read this one to you. Love bade me welcome, yet my soul drew back, guilty of dust and sin. But quick-eyed love, observing me grow slack for my first entrance in, drew nearer to me, sweetly questioning if I lacked anything. A guest, I answered, worthy to be here. Love said, you shall be he. I, the unkind, ungrateful? Ah, my dear, I cannot look on thee. Love took my hand and smiling did reply, who made the eyes but I? Truth, Lord, but I have marred them. Let my shame go where it doth deserve. And know you not, says love, who bore the blame? My dear, then I will serve. You must sit down, says love, and taste my meat. So I did sit and eat. I will put those two things together for you. So can everybody see the painting and the poem?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you can talk about just the poem, you can talk about the two of them together. whatever you noticed in that poem that you want to bring up.
Well, to make the connection in the painting 100% clear, if anyone missed it, right? We have the figures of Emmaus, who, when they're walking with Jesus, express disappointment. We thought that he was the one, right? So just one quick connection there, right? I mean, you have the disciples drawing back. It's not a perfect connection, right? Because they're not saying I'm not worthy, but nonetheless, they're withdrawing somewhat from the manifestation of Jesus and they have to sit down and be led. They have to come to learn how to see in the breaking of the bread.
Mm. The question posed at the end of the first stanza and the answer, the response at the beginning of the second stanza is so delightful in that interchange, or that exchange rather, because love sees that something's wrong quickly, immediately, which is what love does, right? Whether it's a parent for a child or in a spouse, certainly from the Lord, he sees what's wrong. And you would expect in the reading of the poem, because the speaker of the poem lets us know immediately of his or her sinfulness, and instead of saying, what the love says, do you lack anything? And you would expect the speaker to say, I lack holiness, I lack worthiness, I lack. I mean, he does say worthy to be here, but he says a guest, as if to say anyone but me. It's such an, it strikes the reader so off guard that that's the response, right? The author could say, or the speaker could say, I'm not worthy to be here. Why did you invite me? But instead says a guest, someone else that's actually worthy, it's a great, and I love the structural nature of it, because you end the first stanza saying what's going to happen, and then you just get sideswiped by the response at the beginning of the second stanza.
seems to me the entire poem turns on the central stanza and on the central line. Well, actually it divides. There's no central line, but it divides. This unworthy, resisting in some sense, soul nevertheless refers to love as my dear. Yeah, everything turns on that.
Right. Because you do it anyway. You sin anyway. You do dumb things anyway, but that deep down the Lord, that love has captured you.
Well, that's the thing. It's the
Right.
connection of the painting to the poem is the compellingness of love. There's a wonderful line of Flannery O'Connor's in The Violent Bear It Away, where she has the ragged, no, excuse me, it's in Wise Blood. She has the ragged, beaten, filthy figure of Christ dogging her hero from tree to tree through the woods. He's running for his life, but this loping Christ is right behind him the whole way. It seems like that's a different figure, a more violent one, but of the compellingness, compulsion inscribed in unconditional love. I have no resource to refute. Just as I can't look at that painting except by being drawn to it.
I love the fact that there's a recognition that it's fundamentally not right. That I really shouldn't be here. And you should not be the one serving me. You should not be the one emptying yourself out for me, but that is the nature of love. And there is some sense of that just in the shock, right, of the figures at Emmaus, right?
Right.
They can't really take it in, right? I mean, they're blown away by this gesture that Jesus came and sought them out, right? They're leaving Jerusalem, they're leaving the rest of the disciples behind, and he goes after them. So he is that figure coming behind, right? He comes up behind them on the road, right?
Right.
And we should be the one going to him, right? We should be going to him and serving him, but love reverses the order.
And they don't recognize him in the propounding of the scriptures. Explains the scriptures to them all the way to Emmaus. But this isn't about propositions.
We have to remember that as teachers, right?
Yeah.
We can make our students' their hearts to burn, but then they need to go to the breaking of the bread.
And the host is so gentle, so soft, and the interplay in the conversation is so light and airy, as opposed to, the speaker feels shame, has this sense of desire to be hidden, and it's almost as though love is like, it's no big deal, it's fine, but I'm not worried about that. I'm not concerned about that. I need you to come here and sit down at this table and allow me to serve you. The Lord God is love. If that's how, if that's how Herbert is trying to describe him, and as he does through his other poetry, that I think upon your sin no more. I'm forgetful of it. You don't, there's no sense of condemnation. There's no sense of, well, yeah, you should have figured it out. You need to get your act together. No, just come. And yeah, I bore all that weight. Don't worry about that. I can't look at myself. Don't worry. I made you. So you just come. It's liberating, or at least has the potential, I think, to be so for someone feeling trapped by a sense of shame or a pattern of sin, to read that and say, I'm harder on myself than God is on me, which most of us are, if we're honest, or that we presume God will be on us,
There is a graciousness and a tenderness on both sides that's very moving.
Yeah.
And most of us, I think, are not humble enough, right? In the way that we, speak to our lover, We tend to presume on his affections.
Right.
And we presume on his forgiveness. And often, I would even say, expect the service that he gives us.
Let's open it up to the participants. If any of you have any questions, or if you have any thoughts that you want to throw in there, feel free to do so now. And also, of course, the three of you can continue speaking as well.
One thing that I noticed about the painting, which I kind of found interesting, is that it's interesting because Jesus looks quite younger than he would in certain presentations of him. Like, he's beardless. He really looks like a young man, as opposed to the two disciples who are older. And it's almost like his entering into their space and into their lives by making himself present to them through the bread is like renewing them in a way. He's like giving them new life.
So the youthfulness of Christ being itself a source of regeneration and this recreation of humanity, that's powerful.
Well, and of course, oftentimes in this resurrection scene, if you're reading the scriptures, having just read, let's say the Passion narrative, or heard it, let's say in the Triduum, you let's say it's easy to forget that Christ risen from the dead doesn't just mean that the body that was battered and bruised and broken is restored enough to sort of bring it back to life, that you not that you would imagine Christ would be still would still have those scars and those wounds, I mean, other than his hands and his side, but that it's I think, as you both said, there's a youthfulness that I think you might not picture in your mind when you're reading that account, whether it be that or any of the other resurrection accounts.
Another connection that I see between them as the line, "Who made the eyes but I?" And then, "You must sit down and taste my meat." And I connect that to just even the earthiness of the food on the table. You know, you have the water, the poultry, the bread, of course, and the fruit. And God made us to be able to see things. And of course, Caravaggio uses light, you know, so you get this profound contrast between the darkness and the light, which enables you to see. And so there is a revelation that comes out in Caravaggio's paintings through light. Who made the eyes but I, right? I made your eyes to be able to not just see anything, but to see this. This is what you should see. And I made your mouth to taste. And yes, you can drink this water, you can eat this food, but I made your mouth to taste this. This is the food which you must taste to have eternal life. And so there's a beautiful way in which we see our humanity coming out in both, that our Lord understands that we are dust, and yet he has created us from dust to be raised up into his life and into his light. Dr. Cortright, I just keep coming back to that shadow since you asked me about that. And
Yeah.
I can't make sense of it other than thinking that it might mean something in and of itself. And I could be taking this too far, but you know, this is the moment in which he vanishes from them. And I wonder if there's something about a shadow here that is meant to say that Christ will leave them, he will vanish, and yet his almost like his shadow will remain in the breaking of the bread, right? He will still be there. Because, you know, I'm trying to make sense of the way that the light is shining and the way that Jesus's shadow might be projected and the way that the other figure, and it doesn't seem to me to follow any of those. And even if I can see correctly, the way that the shadow even continues down under the arm of Christ, to me, just makes it look like a whole nother figure. So I don't know if he's trying to say something there or not.
Yeah, but the light in this painting is very hard to figure.
Yeah, sometimes Caravaggio does have a single source, but then he does have others
Right.
where there are two sources, and that does make it tricky.
Yeah, and there might be two or three or more. We might have a kind of, excuse me, ambient light that's not being projected, but that's simply hard to say. It could only be the shadow of Christ if we did have a light being projected toward his face. And I don't see it in the painting. I mean, naturally.
Naturally, right, naturally.
Naturally speaking. So yeah, I don't know what to do with this shadow.
And that's why I think there might be something more to it.
Yeah, right. No, I see what you're saying. Whatever I'm going to do with that is going to have to come on another occasion. I didn't see this giving way.
You know what's interesting too is just the question, do you lack anything?
Yeah.
And what is it that we truly lack, right? And is the conversation of the poem meant to bring the soul to know what it truly lacks? Right? What is the food that we need to eat? What is the light that we need to see? Because in terms of even education, of course, here we are at AMI, we're focused on education. In a way, it is helping people to recognize that.
Are there any other questions from the participants before we have final thoughts?
Yes, I like to have a final thought. Can
Go
you
ahead.
hear me? Can you hear me?
Mhm.
I think that of interest is that the biblical account does not entertain the third figure, the third witness that Caravaggio included in his painting. So the significance being that two of the participants there were disciples of Christ, and one was not a disciple of Christ. And his concern and questioning and possibly openness to learning more is kind of indicative of humanity today. And we still have those who are disciples of Christ and those who are questioning.
Mhm. I think it's a great point.
Elizabeth, I think it could be added, you can't make out that fellow's visage. You know what's on the face of the man in green because of the rest of his posture. Know what's on the face of the second pilgrim whose arms are outstretched because you've got him in profile. But you've got the standing figure in partial shadow so that he has features, but you don't know how they're composed. And his posture with his hand in his band is not declarative. Posture isn't declaring anything. I agree with you. He's one of the mysteries of the painting.
Well, the fact that that is not included in the biblical account,
Right.
that third witness is not in the account, and yet he was introduced by the painter.
Right.
And I think that's very significant that he is actually seen at the time.
Well, you all excellently brought us to the title of that painting. I feel like I don't need to say anything about this. I think everybody knows. The Supper at Emmaus. And then Brian told us It's George Herbert's Love 3. All right. Any closing thoughts to the panelists or?
Well, I'm just grateful for the opportunity of the conversation. You can clearly see in conversations like this the benefit of silence and the benefit of allowing others to speak, because your thoughts are drawn toward things you wouldn't have noticed, and it reflects, I think, a larger important idea about education in general, is that it happens best when people are engaged in a communal way, and led by others toward what's true, toward what might be new to them. So I'm grateful for all of your insights.
Likewise.
Ellen, thank you for associating yourself with AMI. We are grateful.
We are very grateful. Thank you three for being here, and for everybody who used up their Tuesday evening to be here with us. I don't really want to say much because that was such a beautiful conversation. I'm just going to let you go and sit on it. So unless there's any more, we can end here, and this will be going on YouTube for you to share with your friends or return to in the future. And hopefully we will be doing many more of these. So thank you, everybody. Have
Great.
a wonderful evening and
Thank
a
you, Alyssa.
Night.
wonderful start to your school
Thank
year.
you.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.